In last video, we talked about the top 5 signs for your interviewers that essentially are saying they're interested in you and potentially you're going to get the job offer. And of course, in today's video, we're going to talk about the opposite, which is the top 5 signs for your interviewers that say you probably wouldn't get a job offer. And these can be verbal or non-verbal clues that you should be paying attention to during your interview that will give you a good sense on whether you're going to be the lucky candidate this time or not. And if you haven't seen my previous video on the top 5 positive signs for interviewers, make sure to do it after this video because it's always good to know what are the things to look out for, both positive and negative, during your interview so you know exactly what to do after the interview, and this will give you more clarity. So without further ado, these are the things that you should be paying attention to because it might just be a different way of saying we're not interested in you. The first negative sign was when you notice the interview was oddly short. Now, sometimes when you have 1 hour interview, you might finish 10 or 15 minutes earlier, which is okay. But the odd thing is when 1 hour interview gets cut down to 30 minutes or even shorter, then that becomes quite strange. So when an interviewer stops the interview prematurely, it's an indication that they realize the candidate doesn't really match the qualification and experiences needed for the job, therefore they are no longer interested in this candidate. This usually means there's a huge gap and a huge mismatch between the company and the candidate, so that the interviewer decided there is no more point of continuing the conversation during the interview, and therefore they decided to cut short so that they can carry on with their daily tasks and interviewing other candidates. The next negative sign you want to pay attention to is when your interviewer doesn't seem interested. Now, they might behave in different ways. They might be distracted, they might not be engaged, they might not have enough eye contact with you, or it seems like they constantly have something in their head and they don't really get involved in the conversation during the interview. Now, this is not as bad as when an interview stops prematurely, but still, what this means is the interviewer is not 100% interested in what you are saying, or what could happen as well is at the beginning of the interviewer seems to be engaged, but over time their interest seems to drop significantly and you can notice they are not so engaged and interested. And this could be they realize you're not really the candidate that they're looking for, or they got put off by certain answers, or even sometimes the way you speak or your personality. The ideal situation should be really you have constant eye contact with the interviewer and the interviewer responds with smiles and eye contacts, and they should be taking some time to ask you questions and genuinely feel engaged in the conversation, ask you questions and then carry on with follow-up questions. But in this case, if they don't say much, or if they don't talk a lot, or if they just give you some cold shoulders, and generally speaking, this essentially means that they're just generally not so interested in you. Then the next negative sign, which is similar to the previous one, is when the interviewer is not discussing the specifics of the job. Now, if you think about their level of engagement in the spectrum of a timeline, at the beginning, they should be super engaged. And if their interests drop off right at the end where they don't talk too much about their job, or they refuse to give you a good understanding and description and explanation about the company, that's when they realize after all the conversation during the interview, maybe you are a B player, not entirely an A player, but if their engagement dropped significantly at the end, they don't respond any questions, or it's very brief one, then it could be they decided you are just okay candidate. Now the next sign is a verbal clue, which is when they say you are overqualified. I know some of you guys might be confused because sometimes overqualification means the company gets someone very valuable with lots of skills and experiences for a cheaper price, but it's not necessarily always the case. When companies say you're overqualified, there are 2 possible negative scenarios that could happen. First is when a company has a fixed budget for hiring, and when you have displayed lots of traits, lots of good experiences, but you might display certain behaviors that signal that you're looking for higher positions with more salary. In this case, the company might sense that you are too senior and you have way too much experiences than what they're looking for, and you potentially are looking for a lot more salary than what they can afford. So this is one case when you're overqualified, which means you're out of the budget. Then the second scenario when they use the word overqualified is when they are looking for an excuse to address to a rude and arrogant candidate. There are certain candidates who are more arrogant, who are very self-centric, who believes they can do lots of things, they are super powerful, and then they're kind of looking down towards the company as well. In this case, the interviewer can actually sense the arrogance within the candidate, but they cannot really say you're an arrogant person, we don't really like you, because that is not really professional. Therefore, sometimes they're going to use the word overqualified to address the candidate's personality. The last sign that you didn't get the job offer is after you finish the interview, you go back home, you check the internet, and you notice the company has put the ads and the job description back online again. And this generally means that they have finished interviewing this batch of candidates and they seem not happy about the quality of the candidates, and therefore they decided to get more leads in, get more candidates in the pool, and continue their search for the candidate. Now, this is not an absolute no to your application, but still, it does show that the company is not 100% satisfied with your behavior and the performance during the recruitment process. Therefore, they want to see more fish before they make a decision. Now, doing an interview is an exhausting work, and sometimes we don't even know if we behave well or not. And these are the indications that will give you a sense on your behavior and the performance. And always remember, what also could happen as well is you feel absolutely shit about an interview, but it turned out that you actually got a job offer, which very depends on how the company perceives your conversation and your behaviors during the interview. So my suggestion as well, if you feel like you have failed this interview, is always keep your heads up and keep going, because there are still so many opportunities and you might just be one rejection away from getting a job offer. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out my other videos on interview skills where I talked about specifically how to answer certain interview questions, as well as the framework that you should use, plus example answers that you can use for inspiration. So I'll see you guys in the next video.